They used my code for 5 years. When I asked for a raise, the CTO laughed. I sold the patent to their rival and watched the tsunami hit. My name is Elise Monroe. If you worked in cloud infrastructure any time in the last 5 years, you've probably used something I built. You just didn't know it was me. That's what stung the most that morning in San Francisco. Not the cold conference room or the staged applause, not even the fact that my name was nowhere on the slides. It was watching my own code come to life on a massive screen dissected and polished by someone else's voice, and realizing no one in that room even knew I existed. He stood up there like he was Moses handing down commandments. Flashed his perfect smile, clicked through the deck like he'd written every line himself. The room nodded, impressed, oblivious. But I wasn't surprised. I hadn't expected a thank you or a credit line. I guess part of me just hoped he'd flinch when our eyes met, that something in him would remember what it cost me to write the thing he was selling like candy. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He looked right at me, and I swear there was nothing. Not guilt, no recognition, just that polished, practiced expression that people wear when they've rewritten history and made themselves the hero. Slide 6 hit harder than I expected. There it was, my architecture diagram, still using the same variable names I'd scrawled on a whiteboard 3 years ago while eating instant noodles between deployment tests. He didn't even change the notes. He didn't have to. No one cared enough to notice. My initials were still buried in the debug log, a throwaway comment I'd made on a Sunday morning after back-to-back crashes. SL03 opt parallel rebalance preload fix. It wasn't clever, but it worked, and it saved the company millions in downtime. He called it proprietary. He said it was in-house. He said it was the future. I watched from 4 rows back, sinking into my chair like I could disappear. My hands clenched the sides of my seat, not because I was angry, but because I was trying not to shatter. That algorithm was my life for almost 2 years. I built it through heartbreak, insomnia, and half-eaten dinners at my desk. When it finally worked, I cried in the server room. No cameras, no press release, just me alone sobbing over a terminal because I knew what I'd made. I didn't want fame, I just wanted it to matter, to be seen. But now it was his story, his win, his brand. I didn't say a word. I sat through the whole talk in silence, watching my work get spun into a fairy tale by someone who never lost a night of sleep over it. Someone who laughed when I asked for support. Someone who told me I was lucky to be there. That morning I realized something I'd ignored for too long. I wasn't invisible by accident. I'd been erased on purpose. My humility had become their eraser, my silence, their weapon. And when the applause came, it was like a thunderclap against my ribs. Every hand clap felt like a nail being driven into the idea that maybe, just maybe, doing good work would be enough, that being brilliant quietly would eventually be noticed. I stood up before the Q&A ended and walked out without looking back. Not because I was done hurting, but because I was done pretending it didn't matter. They didn't just steal my code. They stole the part of me that believed I had to stay silent to be taken seriously. But something shifted that day. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first spark. The one you don't see until it catches something dry and ready to burn. When I first joined Solvexa, it felt like stepping into a world I'd only ever imagined from the outside. It wasn't the office perks or the rooftop happy hours that pulled me in. It was the promise whispered between whiteboards and sprint planning sessions that we were building something big, something that would matter. They recruited me after a local hackathon I didn't even plan to attend. I went because a friend bailed on dinner, and I had nowhere else to be that Friday night. I ended up winning second place with a distributed caching model I built from scratch in a noisy auditorium on a borrowed laptop. 2 days later, their recruiter emailed. She used words like innovative, inclusive, and forward-thinking. She said they needed builders, not titles. It felt different from every other place I'd interviewed, less about resumes and more about what I could make from nothing. I was 23, stubborn, and addicted to solving hard problems. It felt like fate. I started the next week. The team was small, scrappy, and brilliant in that unfiltered kind of way where no one cared about grammar in Slack or how many energy drinks you'd stacked on your desk. I stayed late without being asked, not because they expected it, but because I was obsessed. I wanted to see if I could make the system run faster, smoother, smarter. We weren't saving lives, but it felt close. Every tenth of a second we shaved off latency felt like proof we were doing something real, something elegant. We weren't just engineers. We were architects of the unseen. Every commit, every push was a brick in a cathedral no one else could see yet. There were nights I crashed on the office couch with a hoodie for a blanket and white noise from the HVAC as my lullaby. There were weeks I didn't go home except to change clothes and refill my vitamin stash. I told myself this was what greatness looked like in the making. When our first product hit a milestone release and server performance spiked by 30%, I couldn't stop smiling. My hands shook while watching the metrics. I stayed up all night documenting everything so the next person could trace the path I'd carved through the stack. We celebrated with pizza and sparkling cider at someone's apartment. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to belong. I had built something from scratch, something real, and they saw it. Or at least I thought they did. Looking back, I realized no one ever asked how I made it work. They praised the speed, the throughput, the shiny dashboard graphs, but never the person behind it. At the time, I didn't mind. I thought respect would come naturally if I just kept proving myself. That's what I believed back then. That effort was currency. That talent was a language people always recognized eventually. I didn't notice how quiet my name was becoming until it disappeared entirely. But in those early days, I believed in the work. I believed in them. And more than anything, I believed that building something great would be enough. It was a Wednesday somewhere between sprint reviews and a broken CI pipeline when I finally decided to ask. Not for much, just a raise, just a sliver of acknowledgement that what I'd built was worth more than my current title and a stock grant that would never vest. I wore a clean shirt, ran the numbers, practiced what I'd say so I wouldn't sound emotional. I didn't want to fight. I wanted fairness. I wanted to believe that maybe the stories about hard work paying off weren't all fiction. Jared's office was all glass and recycled wood and fake plants. He motioned for me to sit like we were old friends catching up, like this wasn't about value and power and what I was no longer willing to ignore. I told him what I'd done, reminded him of the performance metrics, the stability increase, the modules they now couldn't live without. He leaned back. That was the first sign. He didn't look at my face. He looked amused, like he already knew how the conversation ended. Then he laughed. Not a chuckle, not even a smirk. A full-bodied, condescending laugh that said, I was a child with no grasp of how the world worked. Something went cold inside me. I wasn't angry yet. I was stunned, like I'd just been slapped with a glove in the middle of a boardroom. My jaw didn't move. My hands didn't twitch. I just listened. He said I was technical. That business was another lane. That compensation wasn't just about contribution, but alignment. I nodded slowly like I understood, but I didn't. Not then. Not really. What I did understand, though, was the look in his eyes. It was the same look I'd seen when he took credit for the refactor that saved our cloud costs last quarter. The same look he gave interns when he asked them to stay late without ever learning their names. It was the look of someone who'd already decided I didn't matter. When I stood up to leave, I smiled. Not because I meant it, because it was the only thing keeping me from splintering. I thanked him for his time, walked out slowly, didn't look back. By the time I reached my desk, the smile was gone. My hands were calm. My breath is even. And something inside me had shifted. I knew in that exact moment that I was done waiting to be seen. Done hoping for fairness in a system that was never built to recognize me. It didn't happen all at once. There was no lightning strike, just a quiet surgical detachment, a rewiring. My grief didn't shout. It sharpened. He thought I'd go home, cool off, maybe even apologize. What he didn't know was that I'd already started rewriting the story. Not his, mine. And from that point forward, every line of code I touched, every interaction I had, every backup I made was laced with one single quiet promise: never again. The first time I considered filing a patent, it wasn't out of ambition. It was out of fear. Not the loud kind that makes your hands shake, but the quiet realization that if I didn't protect what I built, someone else would put their name on it before I could blink. It was 6 months into building the dynamic load optimizer. I had stayed up 3 nights in a row chasing a breakthrough. When the results finally held steady across 3 test clusters, I stared at the console for a full minute before it hit me. This worked. And if it worked, it was valuable. And if it was valuable, I had no time. I didn't tell anyone. Not my team, not my manager. I pulled out a dusty spiral notebook and started outlining the key structures in vague language. Not too vague, but just enough to avoid tripping alarms if someone happened to glance at my sketches during lunch. The next day, I searched for patent attorneys who took small clients. Most of them wanted retainers I couldn't afford. I finally found one, Arthur Delgado, a semi-retired litigator with an office above a pawn shop and a calendar from 2004 still on the wall. He smelled like old leather and bitter coffee. But when I told him what I'd built, he didn't laugh. He said one sentence that stayed with me. "You might not own the building, but if the foundation's yours, make sure your name's carved into the concrete." I paid him in monthly installments, barely covering rent and surviving on canned soup and instant rice for half a year, worth every bland, sodium-filled bite. We filed under my maiden name. It was a small decision with big consequences. No one in the company even knew that name. It had disappeared from my records after onboarding. Delgado helped me write the claims just abstract enough that they would fly under legal radar, but precise enough to hold in court. I hid the paperwork in an encrypted drive labeled recipes. No one ever asked. No one ever noticed. I wish I could say I felt brave. Mostly I felt tired. Tired and oddly guilty, like I was betraying a team I still believed in. Back then, I hadn't let the disappointment rot all the way through. I still believed that maybe if I built enough, earned enough, I wouldn't have to use that patent. It could just sit there. A parachute I'd never need to pull. But deep down, something new. Some small part of me had already counted the times I was skipped for credit spoken over, asked to take notes in meetings where I was the only one who understood the architecture. So I kept my head down. I did my work. And I locked that patent away like a fire extinguisher behind glass. Break only if survival demands it. Years passed. The product was launched. The press releases came. Jared got speaking gigs. And my name still not in the room. But my name was in the registry, on page 12 of a patent application that no one read, and that, as it turns out, was the smartest thing I ever did. Once the patent was secure, I started planning for phase 2. I didn't need revenge. I needed evidence. The kind that couldn't be argued, couldn't be spun, couldn't be erased. It had to be clean, passive, invisible, something no one would notice until it was too late to deny. So I designed a heartbeat module disguised as a lightweight telemetry tool for cluster load monitoring. I pitched it in a team meeting as a way to streamline performance tracking across distributed environments. Jared loved it, called it smart thinking, said it would be a game changer for the next update cycle. I smiled and said I'd draft the integration notes by Friday. No one read them. No one ever did. Inside that module, I embedded a silent ping. Every time the algorithm was triggered, it would send a time-stamped, anonymized data packet to a private server I had spun up under a shell account. It didn't log user data, just execution calls, frequency, parameters, contextual metadata. Legally, it was telemetry. Ethically, it was survival. Over the next 6 months, I built a mirror of the production environment in my own space. Every push, every deployment, every shift in the codebase that touched my algorithm, I mirrored and tagged. I had logs, I had diffs, I had the full picture of how they'd expanded on my foundation without ever acknowledging its source. I annotated everything, wrote detailed change histories, connected the dots between commits and product launches, built timelines that made cause and effect inescapable. If they tried to argue it was coincidental or parallel development, my documentation would shred that claim in seconds. I watched them grow arrogant, confident in the infrastructure I had built. They started pitching it to investors like it was a proprietary miracle. I let them. Every exaggeration only strengthened my eventual case. What they didn't know was that their empire ran on borrowed code, and I had just installed the equivalent of a flight recorder in the engine room. I kept my tone neutral in stand-ups, delivered my features on time. I even stayed late some nights just to keep the illusion steady. All the while, the heartbeat kept pulsing, quiet, precise, unrelenting. By late spring, I had had enough. 57 pages of timestamps, network maps, source lineage, real-time performance data cross-referenced with launch schedules, all tied back to a single origin point, mine. I knew I couldn't hold this card forever. The longer I waited, the more damage they could do, the harder it would be to reclaim what they'd buried. But the moment had to be right. Not just impactful, strategic. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I was preparing to collapse a structure from the inside out, clean, calculated, total. They thought I was quiet because I was content, but I wasn't. I was watching. And when the time came to move, I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd just flip the switch. Let the data speak, and watch everything they built fall in slow, silent pieces. The first ripple came quietly. A low-priority bug report from one of our enterprise clients. Load inconsistency during peak cycle flagged for review next sprint. I knew what it was. An echo. The first breath of the storm. 3 days earlier, I had transferred the patent to StratusEdge, our biggest competitor. Their legal team didn't send flowers or thanks. Just a cease and desist letter that read like a scalpel, 30 pages, time-stamped code lineage, annotated infringement charts, and projected damages in black and white. I watched Jared read it from across the bullpen. He turned pale, then red, then pale again. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought I heard a crack. His assistant cleared the rest of his day. By noon, the executive floor was locked down. Legal pulled in every engineer tied to the back-end infrastructure, not to ask what happened, to find out what we could erase. Brett, one of the few decent devs left, texted me a picture from the whiteboard. A triangle labeled RISK, underlined in red ink, 7 times. I stared at it while sipping the worst cup of office coffee I'd ever had. It tasted like smoke and endings. On Thursday, the CTO's assistant sent out emergency invites for back-to-back calls. HR followed with compliance surveys. Slack lit up with paranoia and denial. No one asked me anything. No one even looked in my direction. I had been transferred to support a week before. Jared called it reallocation. I knew it was exile. What he didn't realize was that he'd handed me low-level access to infrastructure no one monitored, like giving a locksmith the keys to the basement and forgetting to check the vault. When the layoffs came, they hit hard. 22 engineers, half the DevOps team. Leon, who brought his golden retriever to work every Thursday, was told during lunch and left his badge on the counter without a word. The announcement came in a Slack message so sterile it read like a weather alert. Project Hydra had been paused indefinitely. Every engineer knew what that meant. The roadmap was dead. The company was bleeding out. I watched all of it unfold from the break room. No one spoke to me, not out of malice, out of instinct. You don't chat with a wildfire. You don't ask the earthquake how it feels. Jared tried to rally, held a town hall, said nothing was changing. That legal had things under control. His voice cracked on the third slide. Margaret, the CEO, never showed up. Her silence was louder than any PR statement. By Monday, 3 major contracts pulled out. One client posted a vague but damning thread on LinkedIn about ethical sourcing in tech. The post went viral. Investors started calling emergency board meetings. And I sat there, watching, listening. My face went blank. My spine is straight. A storm I had summoned was unfolding with perfect surgical timing. It wasn't joy I felt. Not really. It was clarity, like a fog lifting after years of walking in circles. There was sorrow, too. Real sorrow. For the people who didn't deserve this. For the interns who had believed. For the janitor who joked with me every Friday. But under that deeper was peace, because the truth had finally cut through. They built their house on stolen ground, and now the earth was shifting. Not because I shouted, but because I had proof, because I was ready, and because they never saw me coming. The boardroom was colder than I remembered, sleek, silent, sterile. She was already there, perfectly still, hands folded, like she'd been carved from marble. Margot Dane didn't stand. She didn't smile, just nodded slightly as if granting an audience. I didn't sit right away. I wanted her to feel the pause. The presence of someone she once called Junior now stands across from her without permission or fear. She spoke first, said the fire had been contained, that Jared was reckless, and the board agreed. They were cleaning house. I told her scrubbing smoke wouldn't fix rotten beams. The whole system was cracked because they never bothered to protect the engine driving it. Her jaw didn't move, but something shifted in her eyes. A blink, slow and sharp. She asked what I wanted. I said the truth. Not an apology, not hush money, a statement, a name, mine. She leaned in slightly, voice still low. Said companies don't collapse because of the truth. They collapse because of stories. And right now I am writing one. I told her she was right. But unlike Jared, I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to see the rot. She offered a deal. Full acknowledgement. My name is on record, in exchange for silence. I asked if she even understood what that meant. Then I leaned in and whispered that I wasn't doing this because I was angry. I was doing this because she let him laugh. She didn't flinch, just said I was playing with fire. I told her to remember this. You built your empire on sand, and now it's learning to drown you. I walked out without another word past the assistants, past the guards, past the glass walls built to keep people like me outside. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt precision. And in the center of that cold, clean silence, I left her the one thing no CEO ever wants: a story she couldn't control. The email came at midnight. Subject line: urgent security concern. The body is full of legal phrases and polite panic. Someone had accessed sensitive systems using my old credentials. A breach, an investigation, a warning wrapped in velvet. I knew immediately it wasn't real. The timing was too neat, too coordinated, and the access pattern is too clean. I hadn't touched those servers in weeks. They were setting me up, not with a lawsuit, with a narrative. Unstable genius, bitter ex-employee, rogue dev who couldn't let go. I didn't panic. I opened my window, let the cold air cut through the rising heat in my chest. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person who'd always been better at digging than hiding. Leah Cho. We met in undergrad. She built intrusion detection systems while I debugged scheduling loops. She now ran a boutique security firm for startups that were bleeding and scared. She answered before the second ring. I told her everything. The heartbeat module, the lawsuit, the boardroom, the email. She didn't ask if I was sure. She asked for logs. We worked through the night. She cross-referenced access points, verified IPs, and pulled audit trails from sandboxed environments. They'd staged it, slipped test data through my archived dev path, backdated it, then forged a link to a virtual machine I hadn't touched in months. But they missed one thing: a timestamp mismatch, one error in server sync, a detail so small it screamed real. And it was enough. By dawn we had a dossier, digitally notarized, signed, chain of custody attached, every lie pinned to a breadcrumb they thought I wouldn't find. Leah handed it off to a federal labor attorney specializing in whistleblower retaliation. Within hours, Stratus Edge filed for a protective injunction and submitted a formal complaint. I didn't show up for work that day. I didn't answer any calls. I let the data speak. By noon, the smear campaign stalled. By evening, the same people whispering about sabotage were deleting their tweets. They tried to make me a problem, but I gave them proof I was a witness, and this time they couldn't scrub it clean. They offered me everything: titles, salaries with more zeros than I'd ever seen, clauses so generous they bordered on bribery, all of it wrapped in glossy language and polished smiles. But I said no, not out of spite, not even out of pride. I said no because I had finally realized I didn't want to be inside their house anymore. I wanted to build my own. I named it Mirror, a new kind of platform. Open source from day one, no NDAs, no gatekeeping. Every line of code is documented, every contributor is credited. No black boxes, no invisible labor. I wrote the first 1,000 lines in silence in the quiet of my apartment, with cheap coffee and sun streaming through cracked blinds. No press releases, no funding rounds, just code and truth. Within 3 days, it hit the top 5 on GitHub trending. By the end of the week, 3 universities had reached out asking to integrate it into their curriculum. People who once ignored my comments in meetings were now tagging me in threads, asking how they could help. I didn't reply to all of them. I didn't need to, because they saw me now, not as a problem to manage or a resource to exploit, as a builder, a leader, a A name. Jared vanished from the news. Margot resigned with a statement full of nothing. Their empires unraveled like thread caught on a nail. But I didn't look back. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I wasn't seeking a seat at their table. I was building a new table. One where the rules were different. One where no one had to beg to be seen. Mirror wasn't just code. It was proof that we could do it differently. That power didn't have to be hidden behind suits and silence. And as I typed, each function tested each loop. I wasn't angry. I was free. Line by line, module by module. I rewrote the ending. And this time, the story was mine.